Today's children are growing up in a digital world that brings opportunities earlier generations could only dream of, but also unprecedented risks. Australia heavily restricted access to social media to people under 16, while many other countries are considering similar laws. But is banning the answer, or are there better ways to protect the youth? I'm Divya Gopalan, and this is Connected. We went to RightsCon 2025 in Taipei. It's a leading conference on human rights in the digital age. And we talked to Sonia Livingstone, who leads the Digital Futures Commission at the London School of Economics, and Kate Sim, the director of the Children's Online Safety and Privacy Research Program at the University of Western Australia. She's also a former Google Child Safety Policy Specialist. We asked Sonia what surprised her the most about the digital lives of the younger generation.
I've been researching children and their online lives for as long as the internet's been in existence, so there are always surprises. I guess the number one, which is very salient every time I talk to anyone, like at a conference or to adult groups of many kinds, children have so much to say about their digital lives. They are so committed. They are often informed, even young children, but at all ages. And they really believe it to be kind of very much their world, their digital world. And they, I'm not about surprise, but one of the really interesting things is hearing how they articulate how their perspectives are different from those of the adults around them, especially their parents and teachers, but also I would say the government and industries.
Kate, you researched sexual violence reporting systems and formerly worked on child safety policies for Google. What types of online harms did you see or deal with?
Yeah, when we say online harms, it can sound really scary. Organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has reported, rising prevalence of financial sextortion. But when you really look into the data, it's not necessarily, or it's too early to say whether there's an increase in the net incident, but rather what's happening is that there's greater awareness. And I think there's, with the use of kind of automated technologies and the prevalence of chatbots and spam bots, that this can be really easily duplicated. We have a digital environment where data brokers have extracted personal data so easily that anyone can find really detailed information about your home address or your old pictures, and that can be used by spam actors to target children who are more gullible than, let's say, adults. So I use that as an example to kind of demonstrate it's not necessarily that there are these really scary, child targeting efforts, but rather we've created a digital environment that's made it really easy for bad actors to take advantage of younger people.
Speaking of trying to manage those digital environments, let's talk about Australia a little bit. They've started restricting social media use by children and by age. First, Sonia, if I can get you to explain what these restrictions are and how you feel about them.
So I take a child rights approach in my work. So the idea of a ban seems against children's rights because children gain a lot of benefit from accessing social media as well as they get exposed to risks. So a ban, the Australian approach, everyone is watching, but it seems very lacking in nuance. It seems very heavy-handed. When you consult children themselves, they say they are against bans, but they want something to be done. They want the platforms, they want the environment to be made safer, and they want a lot more support for themselves within it. Apart from whatever the politics of the ban, I think it is partly also born out of a frustration from society and often from parents that not enough has yet been done. And so it feels in a way easier to keep kids away from the platforms entirely, rather than make them a better place for children to live there, and to engage, which is what I think many would want.
I can't agree more with what Sonia has said. To me, having worked in reproductive justice and support for survivors for a long time, this is a digital form of abstinence. We're taking an abstinence-based approach to young people who have developmentally normative and a very understanding interest about, whether it's their bodies and their communities, online friendships that they're building, and their lives, especially in our current day after the pandemic. A lot of young people's access to participating in the social world is through these technologies, and we're taking this really heavy-handed approach to just tell them you can't access it without taking into account what part of the internet are we talking about, what kind of young people are we talking about. The needs of a 6-year-old and a 16-year-old are different, but if we take this abstinence-based approach, all young people's and their many needs and their opportunities are kind of collapsed into this monolith that they're all very young children, which is not true.
So other countries are actually looking to follow Australia's example or carefully watching. In essence, the government has taken matters into their own hand, and they believe that they're creating this so-called environment to safeguard children. Whose responsibility is it, Sonia? Is it the parents? Is it the government? Is it schools? Like, whose responsibility ultimately is it to protect these children from what could be out there?
It's everyone's responsibility. It's always been everyone's responsibility to bring up children, because it's not only bringing up the children, it's the world in which the children grow up. I mean, that's the shared responsibility. So parents, yes, and I think they are struggling because these are fast developing technologies which are pretty kind of difficult to understand, and deliberately so in some ways. Schools, I think schools could do more. Schools often do kind of e-safety. They warn about the dangers, and they encourage kids to be good, kind citizens online, which is fine, but children need and want a lot more critical knowledge about the digital world, about its business models, about its operation, especially as they get older. Government, yes, but what government especially needs to do is to regulate the businesses, and so they play the critical role. I mean, they design the platforms, they manage the flow of services, they algorithmically push certain kinds of contents at children, they target them with their data. All of that, I think, is an ecosystem, and that relationship between the government and the businesses is probably where the biggest contestation is right now, and we haven't got it right yet.
Mm-hmm. You hear the term digital literacy being thrown around all the time, and people talking about, we need more digital literacy in whatever space you're in. But Kate, what does digital literacy mean right now?
Well, yeah, I'm kind of combining what Sonia has said and that question. When we are talking about digital literacy, there's no denying that having kind of basic understanding of how to keep your safety and privacy together is a useful skill for everybody. But if we're looking at systemic change to really address the root problem, digital literacy is the equivalent of telling people, if individualizing and atomizing this really collective issue, and the collective issue is the one of safeguarding young people, which is a collective responsibility. We really have to get to the connection between governments taking responsibility to regulate technology companies, and I really call them as predatory business practices. There's a reason why the internet we experience today is shaped the way it is, and we see how it has created an environment that can really take easy advantage of young people. It was just 5 years ago that we had to click next to look at the next page, and now we just take it as a default that it's endless scrolling, and that was a predatory business practice that social media platforms applied because it boosts their engagement metrics. And why is that? It's because social media companies essentially are ad companies, and the more time we spend, the more they can monetize and extract our personal information into data that's lucrative for them. And it's that ecosystem and it's that profit motive that I think governments are best positioned to regulate.
So how much of a conversation, Sonia, is there about predatory business practices when governments are talking about regulations?
I think it's becoming a global conversation. I think it's being led in different parts of the world in different ways, and there are kind of geopolitical divisions opening up as we see the United States taking a different approach from Europe. We see other continents, other parts of the world taking different approaches also. So what I might say, Europe is the case I know best. We've introduced a significant amount of regulation in the last few years, most notably the Digital Services Act in Europe. It's been heavily contested. I think there's a lot to be said that is positive about the regulation. It tries to take a risk-based approach. It's not trying to ban, it's not trying to do anything simplistic, but it is exactly trying to kind of target the business and kind of business models of the platforms. But much is going to depend on the political will to implement it. And it's very hard to get the regulation of a particular sector right in its impact on children's lives when there are lots of other problems, so other things in children's lives that say make them vulnerable to risk. What we hope is that they won't be particularly so exploited on platforms, and especially that their data won't be used to kind of find them and feed them distinctively harmful content. But it's not going to solve the problem of vulnerable children in society.
So I want to turn this around a little bit and ask both of you this. So in essence, it is, the content eventually reaches the children, and often we don't know it's happening. How do we understand what the child is facing? And I'll start with you for that, where kids actually speak up and report what's happening or that harmful content.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. For example, in the Digital Services Act, there are some clauses that are about user reporting and expanding user reporting features. In the kind of child sexual abuse prevention background that I come from, user reporting is very similar to kind of broad array of options that are called help seeking. And help seeking really refers to the process of, something happens to you and you are trying to find out what happened to me, who do I ask for help, what help do I need, how can I recover and move beyond this. And that is actually a long journey, but what we see instead right now are these user reporting takedown request forms. I'm sure anyone who has tried to report anything online knows just how messy it is. You click on a button in the hamburger bar and you're looking for the reporting button, and then it takes you to a help center that has blocks and blocks of legal lays, and then you have to take screen cap, but what if you forgot to take the screen cap and you don't know the username of the person? And it's why have we created a system that is asking young people and vulnerable users to fulfill the legal information requirements for the companies? We have allowed companies to put their legal compliance as a priority for driving what that process should look like, rather than a helpful journey for young people to find what information they need.
Can I also answer the question? Because I was thinking about the experience of the child who, even if they have managed to get through that tortuous process of reporting, what children say is they don't get a response. They might get an automated response, or they get a response that is way too late and it doesn't really help. So they generally have kind of given up on user reporting to platforms, but they don't want to tell someone in their kind of circle about something that might be embarrassing, or that might have come about because they did something that their parents or teachers will think is wrong. So they kind of don't go through that in the process. So I think from the point of view of the parents and teachers and governments trying to kind of support those children, it is actually very hard to know what children's experience is, and that is made more difficult by the fact that experiences are so personalized. So, what I see on my feed is not what others see on their feed, and so forth.
So then how do you incentivize, one, for the children to speak up and almost give them the reassurance that they will not be, punished or penalized for having come across that content to begin with, and then two, the companies to make it easier for particularly the younger generation to report what they're seeing?
Don't punish them is the start. I mean, many children do get punished for what they show. They do find that their phone is taken away, or they are criticized and treated, as having somehow brought about the situation. So I think that is a really critical cultural shift that we need to make if children are to report. But I think the other thing is, in many countries there's a helpline. They are all underfunded, they need support, they need promotion. Children don't always know the right number or link to follow. And then what the helplines say is they have enormous difficulty liaising with the platforms, once they've heard the problem, to get the platform to identify the problem or take it down, or, change the circumstances so that the problem doesn't continue.
Yeah, and to add to that, some platforms have started to provide these, helplines or hotline numbers, but actually, and because they have such similar names, you actually look at them and they're hotline numbers, which is hotline numbers, their primary function is to collect reports about illegal content, not necessarily to provide the support needed to young people. So again, we see a compliance-driven approach taking over an opportunity to provide resources for young people. So what they need is a helpline so they can talk to someone to figure out what the local resources are, try to figure out how can I talk about this with my parents, how can I, who do I trust to share this information? So kids are actually taking proactive initiative to figure out what to do. We're just not listening to them because we haven't provided them with the tools to do that. Image-based abuse, there might be an opportunity for responding to direct pieces of content, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have provided support to the person. It means that the company has removed the image. And I think we often conflate the two, and we conveniently conflate the two because that is how companies, through their transparency report and their marketing messages, have presented this narrative that taking down content is all you need, when actually what you need is support.
And there are a whole range of kinds of risks. So image-based abuse is one, and it's not working very well, but it's probably received the most resources from both government, civil society, and actually also companies. But if we think about the kind of bullying that goes on among peers, or if we think about grooming, which many parents fear, I know, and or some of the kind of incitements to self-harm, a lot of that content sits under the radar of what gets taken down. But especially if it accumulates around the child, especially if it's kind of amplified for particularly vulnerable children, then that is enough to, to cause harm. But it doesn't fit within always the platform policies to remove it.
And to add to that, content doesn't just exist on its own. Content comes from us. Content comes from everyday lives. One thing that many of us, like Sonia and myself, are worried about is that we keep thinking about these issues as a content issue. Content issues are surfacing. They're symptomatic of broader social issues: eating disorder, sexual violence, peer bullying. These are things that predates the internet, but we're seeing them in a certain form, and in a certain form that's easier to track. So of course, takedown should be part of the discussion, but that doesn't mean that we've actually addressed the underlying issues. And I think that's where we would love to see investment in things like helplines, investment in things like youth-serving organizations where kids can have honest conversations about device uses, can have helpful conversations with their parents.
And very loosely related on the topic of content, Meta got rid of its third-party fact-checking programs on Facebook and Instagram. Do you have any concerns about that, particularly now with young people who are using those platforms? I'll start with you there, Kate.
Yeah, in the US and particularly in the past year, we've seen unprecedented and continuing attacks on reproductive justice, which is something that's impacting adolescents particularly. Young people living in areas that are politically conservative or politically controversial need access to vital life-saving reproductive information about transition, information about health, and internet is their first source to go to that. So we see misinformation and kind of content abuses. I see them as very much related issues about, what are the opportunities that are available for young people to receive the care and the direction that they need. And that's, yet another moment of mask off from Mark Zuckerberg, from big tech companies, that shows that, again, these kind of gestures of good faith about information hygiene were really purely a branding move that really doesn't get to, again, the predatory business practice of having an algorithm that allows the kind of attention-grabbing information to float around.
And how would that factor into your research on children's use online?
Well, I was thinking, in a way, beyond America, there are many parts of the world where children will say they've never benefited from any kind of fact-checking or moderation anyway. So children are already trying to navigate, it's so far from the world that we originally imagined when we gave children access to the internet and said, all the world's information at your fingertips. It turned out to be all the world's disinformation, conspiracy theory, problematic content, hateful content at their fingertips and coming towards them. So, many parts of the world haven't had those benefits yet and maybe now won't get them. But I think from children's point of view, there is we as a society have kind of outsourced information provision to the platforms and to a lot of those companies. So I often ask myself, okay, children want health information, let's say online. Who is providing that information? So it is also partly about society not abdicating responsibility to business, but making sure we really invest in good public resources for children and make sure they can find it.
Now, we're just about running out of time, but before we go, I'm a parent of an 8-year-old who's now starting to discover the digital world, and I'll start with you. Kate, what advice would you have to parents or those who are managing the younger generation on allowing them space to make the digital world what was supposed to be a place to play and get information, particularly with your knowledge of big tech and how they operate?
Yeah, I mean, I want to start off by telling parents that they're in a really, really tough position, right? We're seeing, austerity, their social care is being cut left and right. It's really hard to find, daycare opportunities. Care labor platforms are becoming more and more popular because parents are looking for someone to provide care to their children when they can't because they have to work. And these are all really connected issues. So I feel for the parents. I think parents also carry a lot of guilt in kind of giving a tablet. You've had a long day and you're like, here's a tablet and look at that. And I can watch Real Housewives for an hour or something. It's completely understandable. And I want to reassure them that they are doing their best. And what the kid needs of different ages is really to be in an environment where they feel like they can confide in the adults in their lives. Kind of going back to what Sonia has said earlier, there was a recent study last year asking young people in multiple jurisdictions, when something happens to you online, who do you go to? And number one are siblings and peers. If they have good relationship with their parents, then they go to parents. And when they do, actually more than half of parents respond negatively. And kids' devices are confiscated and kids are worried that they're not going to be believed or punished. So I know it's counterintuitive. And that kind of, jumping to why didn't you do this, why didn't you do that, is coming from a care reaction. But really what the child needs is to be heard and to be assured that things happen. It's not your fault. Let's figure it out together. You're not defined by this, and we can move on together, and we can learn from this.
I'm giving you the last word here. What can you tell us about managing your children or the younger generation's use of the digital space and devices?
So I would like to rephrase that question as managing the digital environment for the benefit of your child rather than, as it were, managing the child. I think it's a collaboration. It's a super complex dynamic between the parent and the child. I spend a lot of time interviewing parents. I'm talking to children, hanging out in the family home, kind of listening to the conflict, the tension that goes on around technology. I mean, one thing I see is, as Kate said, family life is hard to navigate in difficult times, and often the technology becomes kind of the focus of the problems and the thing that parents think they can fix. The emotion attached to the technology often comes from somewhere else, and that's something I think parents could reflect on, but kind of really positively. The other thing I see going, from door to door is how different families are. But all families tell me they're kind of typical. They have the same problems and they want to do what others are doing and they're worried about what others will think of what they're doing. But actually behind all those doors, they have different values, different preferences, different levels of knowledge, different kind of concerns, different children. And so, I think in a way, if they kind of can key into that and think about what are the values and concerns and particular factors shaping their family life, they probably know better how to get it right than if they try to do what they think everyone else is doing, which in any case they're not.
Thank you both so much. What a great conversation. Thank you. Sonia Livingstone and Kate Sim, great to have you on the program. Thanks for your insight. That was Sonia Livingstone from the London School of Economics and Kate Sim from the University of Western Australia. As mentioned, we were at RightsCon in Taipei, where activists, academics, and policymakers convened to discuss human rights in the digital era. And we asked participants about their thoughts on age limits for social media and about the challenges and opportunities technology brings to the human rights movement.
I think with social media, I think we need to be careful about how it is being used and designed. I think we need to have more nuanced conversations about the impact that it's having on different types of populations.
We have the same situation in our country. The TikTok also banned it in our country. The banning, it's not the solution of making and protecting our youth and kids. We are telling that improving media information literacy, improving the skills and education, this is the main instrument or tool.
I mean, honestly, I think we need to put the responsibility of making social media safe for everybody on the companies and the platforms that are running it. If we had social media that was safe for people, then we wouldn't have to worry about banning young people from being on it.
I work on a team called AI Labor and the Economy, which focuses on how AI is impacting jobs, labor, inequality, the economy. One of the areas that we look at is the focus on data enrichment workers across a global data supply chain, where workers are being workers are enriching data, annotating it, categorizing it so that it can be usable to train AI systems. Right now, these workers are not treated very well, and so there's more we can do around the world to improve conditions for them.
I do a lot of research that is related to the right to protest in the digital space. People are coming out using digital platforms like social media or chatting applications to express themselves, to advocate for their rights. These technologies are also enabling authorities or bad actors.
Essentially, social media has allowed this massive propaganda machine, this old school historic propaganda machine, to do things faster, more agile, and in a way that we, as the progressive movement, as campaigners, are a little bit slow to respond to, just because of the speed of how things move.
So, how do you feel about social media bans for children? Share your thoughts in the comment section on our YouTube channel. It has been good to have your company. Thank you for watching, and remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.